Hello, welcome back to Popcorn Chat. I'm here today with a wonderful guest, and they are called Min. Min is a wonderful Instagram film reviewer, cosplayer that I wanted to get onto the channel. So I will let them introduce themselves. How are you today, Min?
Hey y'all, I'm doing great. I'm just so happy to be here because we've been kind of chit-chatting back and forth on Instagram for
Yeah,
like a little over like a year now, and it's just really nice to just sit and have like a sit-down conversation with you finally.
yeah. With the time zones as well, it's always quite difficult to try and catch like in the DMs like live. So it's always a bit difficult, but we've managed to seal this down and
Yeah.
hopefully have a really good chat. But yeah, I wanted to get you on just because I think your Instagram account is amazing. Um, Please go and follow Min if you don't already. They do lots of cosplays, film reviews, all that sort of. I love the aesthetic of your page. I just have to say that outright.
So sweet of you to say. I really appreciate it.
But yes, so I wanted to get you on, and I guess the first question I wanted to ask you was about your cosplays. And I think what I love about them is the fact that you do sort of really sort of different characters. I think it was yesterday that you did Mia Thermopolis from the Princess Diaries. I loved that, and I just wanted to know like why do you choose those characters? Why do you sort of go for something a little bit different?
I think that's a great question. Like, I almost want to say I don't do traditional cosplay, and like, it's kind of funny when we think about it. Traditional cosplay is like anime characters,
Yeah.
and it's like more well-known characters, I guess. For me, I started doing this out of pure and utter boredom and sadness. It was like 2020. Um, I'm a Leo, so like I have whenever I go out with my friends, I gotta be like, they say dress casually, and I'm like, got it, throw that memo out. And I show up like, in my big outfits, whatever else. But then, obviously the pandemic happened.
Hmm.
And, I just was just really kind of sad. Like it really kind of gave me a lot of depression. Like I wasn't going out as much with my friends. I was just kind of bored at home. And I love watching movies. I love, love, love film. I love the language of film. So I work in an adjacent field to film. I do a lot of work in animation. So also before all that, like English, it sounds crazy for a lot of people to hear me talk, but I mean it. English is my third language.
Wow.
So I actually had to use a lot of films growing up to learn how to speak English. So when I was younger, I would watch a lot of older films because for non-English speakers, right? Older films, the voice actors and the actors, they're just more articulate.
Hmm.
They enunciate everything, and I think the reason why, I'm not a film historian, but if I had to deduce why, it's probably because they came from the stage, and then
Yeah,
they moved
probably.
more towards the film, so that articulation really never left. So yeah, long story short, I've always loved film. I've always loved cinema. And, I was just kind of bored at home, and I was just like, I don't know who to talk to. I really want to talk to people about films and movies, but I didn't really want to be like, other movie reviewers. I wanted to just kind of do something a little different. And I always loved cosplay. So I'm just like, oh, let's just see what I can do. And then it just started from there. It was just literally just started from that point of just finding things in my closet that just matched what I was watching. Because I love to do that anyways. I love to just recreate the outfits anyways. But now it's kind of like, oh, I'm doing it for myself. Why I pick the characters? That's a great question. Because like the second part of your question is like, why do I pick the characters that I pick? I like to pick characters that either they mean something to me personally, they've shaped my life in some way. Because I think movies, whether you're, in the time period that the movie was made, a lot of the films I review, some of them are older films, 1940s films, 1950s films, versus like, growing up in the 21st century. I think these characters and their stories, a lot of them are timeless and they mean something to me. And that's all movie is you see yourself in these characters in some way or another, and for better or for worse, like it's really, it shapes you for better or for worse sometimes, and it's important to talk about that. So there's some characters that I cosplay that they've shaped me sometimes for the worse, and then
Mhm.
like I cosplay that shaped me for the better. They've influenced my daily style, they've influenced me in some capacity or another. But I also started cosplaying as just characters that I just recently just watched, and So it can be as shallow as that, or it can be as deep and emotional as what I just mentioned.
Oh, amazing. That was such a great answer. And like you were saying, I was very much the same. I started up my Instagram because of the lockdown. I had a few friends that I knew that were interested in film. I had like a Twitter and yeah, I hadn't even done YouTube at that point. But I was inspired and I was like, oh, you'd be really good on Instagram because it's so visual and film is so visual. And yeah, I was exactly the same. Started in lockdown and have met some really like amazing people from across the globe, you know, like yourself. And I think it's been such a sort of pivotal thing for a lot of people, especially during these times, to speak to people that are like-minded and people that, you know, are cheering you on and then loving what you're doing. And I think that's such a great thing, a good positive thing about social media, definitely. Yeah, it was interesting as well. You said about the characters and about, you know, I'd probably even do it in my day-to-day life. Like I might try and dress like a certain character that I've seen on film or TV, you know, just because it influences you, you know, so heavily in terms of their sort of style, maybe even pick up some mannerisms from people. But I think that's just the power that films have. But
I
yeah.
mean, absolutely. I remember like when I was younger, and again, like people are so shocked to hear this, but like I said, English is my third language, and I didn't know how to speak it when I was like 5 or 6 years old. So I watched movies to learn English essentially. And I remember I actually got in trouble in school for calling a teacher a dumb broad. I was watching like noir men talk, and
Yeah.
it sounds very different having like a rugged, hard-boiled man talk, and then it's like that voice is coming out of a small Asian child, like very, very different. So it's funny, and you're right; it does influence you in one weird way or another.
Mm. And you sort of touched upon as well, sort of like you sort of, I know you love the sort of vintage era, the 50s, 60s. What is it that draws you to that sort of like Americana kind of era?
That's a great question too. I think it's like as shallow as like, you know, when I was growing up. See, I'm 27 years old currently when this
I'm
video is coming.
26, so we're okay.
Okay, yeah. But the funny thing is, my parents are very old. My father was born in 1941 during the height
Okay.
of World War II. And my mother was born in 48, so right after the war. So my mother, I guess she would be considered an early boomer, and my father is the silent generation. And then I grew up with my grandparents around the house. So my grandparents were born in the 20s, so they were like
Wow.
the greatest generation. So I just was raised by a group of very elderly people. So even my Vietnamese that I learned, my first language, was an older Vietnamese. It was older than a lot of like what my friends were talking even. So I think it's just that was just the media that I grew up with around the house. It was just constantly playing. And I kind of make a little bit of a joke. So you've heard of weeaboos, you've heard of teaboos. Have you heard of a freeaboo? Because my father is a freeaboo, okay?
No.
That's what I call like people that are just like they're just really into that Americana. My
Okay.
father's a freeaboo, and he's so into cowboy movies. I've never met a man more into cowboy movies than my dad. It was just always playing. I think every man has a man crush to some capacity. My dad's man crush was John Wayne and Elvis Presley,
Okay.
but more John Wayne. So I think that's just where it came about.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And seeing like the influences, you know, from generations, sort of down the line, and what has influenced you and sort of carried on, you know, throughout your sort of passion for films. I love that. Yeah, and another thing I wanted to sort of ask about your sort of Instagram feed is you put a lot of stuff on your stories, especially about sort of Asian culture and representation of Asian American sort of people. And I find it so informative, like it's so eye-opening. And I just wondered, like, what kind of responses do you get from people from those sort of posts?
So interesting. It can be anything from, in general, I would say like 80 to 90% of it is incredibly positive.
Hmm.
Incredibly like, you know, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Or like, you know, for example, I did a panel or a whole like little story thing about Shang-Chi, right?
Yeah.
And I did another one about like the fortune cookie, and people don't even know this about like, so there's this one movie that I loved as a kid. I love, and I still love this movie to some capacity or another. I might even do a cosplay of it eventually. But it was Lindsay Lohan's Freaky Friday, right?
Yes.
I love that movie. I think it's so cute. I love that girl rock scene. I shopped at Hot Topic at one point or another. If you, I don't know if you have Hot Topic
No,
over
we
in Britain.
don't, but we know of it. Yeah, we know of it.
Well, God bless you, because you know what? It's good. You don't need to spend your money like that at 15. Um, so basically, yeah, I shopped at Hot Topic at 15 years old. I loved Freaky Friday, and it's cute. But then,
I love
you
it.
know, when you look a little deeper into it, it's really kind of freaking racist. Like, you know, they have these like Asian people tricking this white family with a fortune cookie, like that can make them switch their bodies, deceiving them, like hiding in their food. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's kind of horrifying. And it's even more horrifying when you don't know the history of the fortune cookie, because it actually came from the Japanese. And you know, basically the reason why it's been associated with Chinese Americans and Chinese people is because during Japanese internment camps, when an entire ethnic group was rounded up senselessly by the United States government, you know, a lot of these communities are adjacent to each other. So Chinatown is adjacent to Little Tokyo and China or Japantown, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of Japanese laborers and migrant workers, they actually took over the factories that a lot of Japanese people worked with. And then over time, over the decades, it just kind of slowly became associated with another group. But the origins and how that transition happened is very painful, and not many people know about that. So then when we go to 2005, when, you know, Lindsay Lohan, and she's in this like cute movie for teen girls about Freaky Friday, you see this like Chinese restaurant, they're treating the fortune cookie as like this ancient old magic from China, and I'm like, that's just so wrong. You know, because the actual history about it is just so much more painful and so much more, I think, you know, real. It's just real history, and it's just sad that it just got kind of lost in translation somewhere. And to, you know, promoting the idea that Asians are deceiving people, sneaking magic in their food, it's very like sad. Or even like more lighter topics like that. Like I talked about like Shang-Chi and like the difference between like, you know, Mulan, and like how they're doing like, you know, ancestral worship, and then versus how Shang-Chi did it. Like, you know, it's one is a little bit more accurate than the other. We're getting a little bit better in some areas. You know, and so I just break down, like sometimes I just break down cultural things. Sometimes I break down like just pop cultural things. Like I did a whole panel about like why I didn't like, you know, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, and it's just like these little things, we don't notice these little things, but they do matter to the people that watch them. And I think it's because, you know, I think it's because like we're such a small minority group in America. We're 5.6% of the population. So
Wow, okay, that's a lot smaller than I thought. I didn't
yeah,
realize.
we're small, but we're growing. We're growing, but we're small. I think my ethnic group specifically, I'm Vietnamese. I think we're 1.6, if not. Don't quote me on these statistics, by the way. Like I'm kind of just spitballing, but I think the last time I checked, we're like about 1.6, 1.8. So you know, it's, you know, sometimes in America, I'm like the first Vietnamese person that someone meets. You know what I mean? Or I'm the first, even sometimes I'm the first Asian someone meets. So I did this just because like I happen to know a lot about the subject, but also it's just something that does matter to me. And I obviously can't cosplay as these statistics. That's hard to do. So I use my, you know, Instagram stories to talk about that. The overall, yeah, like I said, the response has been very, very positive. I think I had one person. I think, yeah, it was one person that basically was like, it was actually the most insane day, but he was just like, you don't know, you sure like to hear yourself talk, don't you? Like, he for real said that to me. It was
and they
like,
follow you as well. So they
yeah, they follow me. And it's just like, well, I don't know why you're here. Like,
yeah.
um,
It's too much energy, too much, takes so much more energy to be negative and go out of your way to say something like that. So
or like they'll just like be like, but actually, or they'll play like whataboutisms with me, and I'm like, okay, like I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you don't like it, I'm not saying anything that's wrong. I did do my research before like I posted these things.
yeah.
If you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you, homie. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I think your posts are always really informative and you reshare them as well from other people, other accounts, you know, that are in that position. So I always feel that they are really sort of valid sources and they open up sort of my eyes. And like you said, like 80%, 90% of your sort of followers as well. And I think they're so informative because I saw Shang-Chi and I've seen Mulan when I was younger. Loved Mulan. Loved it, I think, because it focused a little bit more on sort of maybe, from my perspective at least, female empowerment and sort of taking on the family's honor, things like that. I understood that, but exactly what you said, sort of about the sort of ancestors when they visit their ancestors and how Shang-Chi did it better. And I think, obviously that's come with time, having those voices both on camera and behind the camera, I think have been quite an important part in playing, for change. Would you agree with that?
That's a great question, right? Because I always advocate for a diversity of also thought as well, because you can have a panel of, let's just say, if you want to make a movie about Asians, right? You can have a panel with 50 Asians on there. But if they're all like me, if they're all like from the American South, they're all from like the suburbs, and they're all like, they all finished high school, they all finished college, or they all got are we really getting a diversity of Asians? Not really. No, I don't believe so. I think when people talk about that representation behind the camera, I think we need to be very careful about that, right? Because, for Raya and the Last Dragon, you can have Southeast Asians working behind the camera. You can have but if they're all coming from the same socioeconomic background, if they're all coming from the same place, are we really getting anything accomplished here? Or if they're all from the motherland, or if they're all from the diaspora, are we getting anything done? Is that a true diversity? I don't know. I can't answer that question, because that's something that I go back and forth with myself on. Because yeah, sure, absolutely. We can have a Thai person, and they'll have a very different experience than me as a Vietnamese person. So that's true. We can have that, but then we need to have a Thai person maybe from the motherland, or maybe from et cetera, because that has a totally different experience than me. Just talking to, because I went to a school that was really, really diverse. I had a lot of foreign exchange students from the mainland countries, the motherland countries, and we are very different, so different in terms of how we perceive the world. So I think that it's something that I feel very iffy about. I think diversity is great, but it needs to extend beyond the skin deep.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. Yeah, there's so many factors that come into including people from different, exactly what you said, sort of socioeconomic backgrounds, disability, culture, religion. There's so many different things that come into play now. Yeah, and I'd like to think it's only going to get better, hopefully, in terms of hearing different people's voices and their experiences being put on the screen, and people going to see them as well. So it takes one thing for people to make these films, speaking their experiences, but it also takes a lot of people to go and see that. And hopefully by seeing people that, you can relate to, maybe you've not seen that representation on screen, people are going to still go and see those films and not let them flop. Hopefully that's going to be the way forward. Yeah. I guess more of a positive light. I know you've touched on a few films already about sort of Shang-Chi, Raya. Are there any other sort of films that you've seen recently that you think show Asian representation well?
Oh wow, that's a great question. It's funny, when I was giving my thesis review, someone asked me that same question, and I would say it's for me, I think we're in such an early stage, right? And I almost am concerned about this, that we're a fad, and I don't know how I feel about that. Because, for example, right, I've been seeing a huge rise in, I guess, what we call Korea boos, people that are in it, I don't know if that's a thing in Britain, but in America, there's so many teenage girls that are just K-pop. Oh my gosh, we love K-pop.
Yeah, it's a bit popular over here, but not as big as America, I don't think.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. But yeah, basically in America, it's K-pop is such a thing right now. And then obviously adjacent to that is actual Korean culture, Korean food, Korean clothing, Korean things, right? And it almost came in the last, I would say 10 years, it just became bigger and bigger and bigger. And I've seen it happen with a lot of my Japanese friends, and it's very frustrating when you're a trend, So when I was growing up in 2008, 2007, Japan was a bigger thing. And there's so many people that were just oh my gosh, Japan, kawaii desune, they're talking it's just horrifying. It's horrifying. And it just makes me just want to gouge my eyes out, honestly. But, you know, I wonder to myself if that is real, like, because it becomes very watered down, right? It becomes really, really watered down. So it's kind of like, you know, a lot of people, they love To All the Boys I've Loved Before. And that is like, you know, the girl's half Korean. And sure, you get some like cute Korean culture things. Like there's a very popular milk drink I get at H Mart. If you don't know what H Mart is for your followers, it's basically like a Korean owned store in America. It's very popular here. It also has other Asian dishes from around Asia as well. But yeah, it's just like, is that really Korean culture? Like that
one thing.
That was in the first movie. The second movies, they try to do a little bit more, but you know, it's I'm always kind of like sad about that. So I guess I like little bits of each film, right? It's just getting better and better and better with every film that I've seen. Like, so I talked about one film called The Toll of the Sea. That's a very old film. That's from 1928, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
and
wow,
it has Anna May Wong in it. So Anna May Wong, if you guys don't know, she's like our first major Asian American icon. She was basically one of the first few voices for Asian American representation, and that movie is abysmal. Like, it is like really, like, it's not a great film, but I still think that it's important. It's important because it shaped the way for other films and other representation. But if I had to shortly answer your question, I think the best film I've seen was in 2021, last year, and it was Blue Bayou. I love Blue Bayou.
I don't know that one.
It was a very, like, I don't want to say it's a small project, but it wasn't it was like an independently made film. It was beautiful. It was the story about a transracial adoptee.
Okay.
And basically his name's Antonio, and he was brought over to America from Korea, but abandoned by his family that brought him over, and he was just jumping from foster care system to another. But this is a really interesting issue, was that he's facing the threat of deportation because the family that brought him over, they never really filled out his paperwork properly. So now, even though he's been in America since he's an infant child, he's facing the threat of, essentially deportation. And it's such an interesting movie because that happens every day.
Yeah,
every single day. So, like, just to put in perspective for you, like when Raya and the Last Dragon came out, that same week, 33 Vietnamese refugees were deported for, like, essentially almost that same reason. So it's such an interesting topic because when we talk about this, you know, like, I don't know how it is in Britain, but in America, Asians are kind of reviewed as like, or viewed as people that just don't have problems. Like, oh, we just perfect. We just have like great lives. Like, it's called the model minority. We're just like these model citizens that just are all rich and happy, and that's not the case. They couldn't even be further from the truth. So I love Blue Bayou for that reason, is that it showcases a very serious problem, and it does it with such artistic vision. It does it with such great film composition. The language of it was so beautiful. I think it was just easily one of the most perfect films I've seen. But outside of that film, it's kind of like a big, like, you know, it's kind of like a pie. I just kind of take where I can. It's like, I like elements here. I like this.
But as a whole, they're not perfect. Yeah.
They're not perfect. And I can only hope that it'll get better, because I think it will. But I am nervous about that thing we talked about where we're a trend. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, this decade it was Japan. This decade currently it's Korea. Am I going to be the next on the block? Like, I wonder that, because I noticed like even more people were buying Vietnamese things, like, you know, like shirts that say like phenomenal or something, like, you know, with like pho, that's like edition. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I thought to myself, like, as I saw them, like, is this what Japanese people have been dealing with for like 2 decades? Like, it's happening to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, it's finally happening to me. Like, ugh. So yeah, that's my big concern, right? Is that I don't want to be the minority of the month. I don't want to be the minority of the decade. And I don't know. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because I don't know how to feel about it. Because on one end, it's kind of cool, but on the other end, it's cool in that, like, you know, people do look into, like, some people do. They actually do look into the Korean culture. You know, they actually attempt to learn the language respectfully. That's cool, and I respect that a lot. But how many of those people are doing it versus how many of those people are not doing it? You see what I mean? And they're
Yes.
making YouTube channels saying like, you know, they're going to like the motherlands. Like me and my Korean boyfriend are gonna like try
Yeah,
barbecue.
that's it.
Like, you know what I mean? So yeah,
Yeah, I feel like it's a lot of I think it's happened to a lot of cultures, but it's that sort of thing that happens again and again. It's sort of taking what you want from someone's culture because it seems to fit your sort of trends or aesthetic at the moment, but not taking the people. You're taking an element of someone's culture or identity and, you know, using that and, you know, you sort of delved into the sort of realms a little bit of cultural appropriation and things like that. But I think it is tough, I guess, because you want to see representation of, you know, people like yourself, and but at the same time it's the sort of insensitive way that people go about it possibly is the tricky, like you said, it's you're on a knife's edge there, you're kind of unsure where it's going to lie.
yeah. And I mean, I don't have all the answers to the questions. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because like, you know, this is one that I teeter totter back and forth with myself on all the time. Is problematic representation, is that better than no representation? I
Mm,
don't have the answer to that question, and I don't think I ever will. So it is just really like how you see it.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I think that's completely fair. And, you know, that's sort of why I wanted to get you on here is, you know, to hear from you, you know, you want to hear from, you know, people from, you know, those sort of backgrounds. I don't want to be going around saying, you know, what I think. You know, I want people to hear from people like yourself, Min, you know, voicing these opinions. And I think what you do on Instagram is so um it's so eye-opening and informative, and I think more people need to, like, honestly, I'm not just saying this because you're here, but on Instagram, you know, it gives you like the top stories of who you always watch, and like you're always in the top like 10 because I find your stuff so interesting. I'm like, how can I educate myself and have a broader horizon, and look at films differently, like you said, like, even like Freaky Friday, which is a film I loved growing up, but yeah, looking back, okay, yep, I'm not sure about those sort of opening scenes with the sort of the restaurant and things like that. So I think we can always grow, and I think that's
Yeah.
what this has been able to do, really, with accounts like yours.
And I never tell people to like not like these films either. I'm like, you can,
Mm.
because I love Freaky Friday. I still do. It meant something to me as a kid. But it's like, you know, we also have to look at it and be like, maybe we should never do that again. Like maybe we should just never
We can
repeat that again.
learn and progress from
Yeah.
this. Yeah. Yeah. These things happen, and you know, things that are happening nowadays, like in 20 years' time, something might be called back and say, hang on, in, you know, 2022, what so and so did wasn't appropriate. So I think that's, you know, that's part of growth as humanity. It's going to keep repeating in different forms, and I think that's always going to be there, as you know, as we are human. I think it's going to be there. Yeah. So the only sort of last question that I have for you, Min, is what do you think that Western films can do to show various cultures in a better way? What can they do going forward? What do you think they could do?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a big one too. I don't know if I have the answers to
Give
that
me a
because again, like,
dissertation.
oh gosh, like what can they do better? I think what we can do better is, at least for me, this is my approach to things, right? So my approach to things is I see, what do we have a lot of? You know, like what do I see constantly all the time? And why do I keep seeing that all the time? And
Mhm.
that's kind of where I start with, you know, it's like what keeps popping up? And then that brings me to the question of why that keeps popping up. So, for example, right, like I just graduated from master's school and I did my thesis on this
Amazing.
exact topic. So my thesis was on this trope that we keep seeing in media of like Asian women with like dyed hair streaks. Like they
Yeah.
had like purple hair, and then it's just like I keep seeing that over and over and over again. And it's funny because like the reason why I even noticed that was because I want to do a cosplay series because May in America is Asian American Heritage Month. So I wanted to do a whole series about that. And I noticed the girls that I kept picking all had dyed hair for some reason. I'm like, but I loved them as a kid, but they just
Yeah.
kept having dyed hair. So I was like, why? And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not the first person to realize that either. Like other Asian creators called this out too. And it's a whole trope. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's a whole thing. And then it just dove into like a whole research topic for me about where that came from, why that's happening. So that's my big, like, you know, thing for just anyone. It doesn't matter, like, you know, who you are. It doesn't matter if you're Asian, you're Black, you're Hispanic. Like, if you keep seeing something over and over and over again, why does that keep happening? And where is that coming from? Is that coming from a place of good intention, or is it coming from a place of classism? So, for example, like, you know, I'm not fond of this trope either. And these are not people of color, but they are marginalized in some capacity or another. They're poor white Americans, you know, and they're portrayed as imbeciles. They're portrayed as like these low life, racist people that are like, you know, just unintelligent, mumbling fools. And that's no good. I mean, I'm sure that there's some like that. I'm not going to like discredit that, but like, it's just kind of ridiculous. Like, it's just kind of cruel. And what does that do for anyone? It's just demonizing poor working class people. Like, I don't understand, you know, or like other stereotypes where it's actually really funny. It's the Amish in my country, you know. There's a whole thing called, there's a whole genre of romance novels, of like Amish Christian romance novels. I'm not joking.
Wow. Okay. That's the first I've heard of this.
It's a whole thing, and it's so weird, and it's basically coming from a place of like, you know, non-denominational Christian women, and they're just kind of, they're craving this pastoral setting, and they've never actually even met an Amish person, to my knowledge. I'm making assumptions here, but they're like fetishizing them, like this very marginalized community that doesn't really have much representation in media, and it's very disturbing and weird. So you know, my big like thing for people is just like, you know, what are you seeing constantly over and over again? Who is that serving? Why is that there? Like, you know, who is it hurting to some capacity or another? And who is it helping to some capacity or another? And that's kind of like where I always start with. And then, and that can apply for any race. That can apply for anything. So, you know, I've been seeing a lot of Black creators that I follow. They're talking about this one trope that like came up. And again, I'm not Black. I don't come from a Black experience, but it was important for me to hear about it from other Black creators. They talked about like this quirky nerd girl trope, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, is like, how do they feel about it? And then they, for in general, a lot of people like it, and a lot of people talk about it. So then I was like, oh, that's interesting. Or then they talk about like, you know, tropes that we see all the time about like a strong Black woman and how that can be problematic because like they always have to be strong. They always have to be like this and that for other people, typically like white viewers. And I didn't know about that either. So listening to other people, listening to other communities, how they perceive like a trope, how they perceive a stereotype that affects them directly, that's important as well. So, you know, because I can have my own opinions about something, you know, I can be wrong, I can be right, because I don't know. So yeah, that's number 2, listening to what other people have to say, listening to like people from those communities, how do they feel about it? I would listen to both sides too, like, you know, because people aren't a monolith. There's people that feel some way about it, there's some people that feel some other way about it. I like to listen to why people feel they like it, why people feel like they don't like it. Number 3 is I would feel like, you know, looking at movies and media that people from those communities are recommending, because sometimes it's not making mainstream. It's not making the big Hollywood box offices. Sometimes they're indie films. Sometimes they're independently made projects. Sometimes they're comic books that maybe make an adaptation. Which I know I've seen you and me, like we post some books here and there sometimes on our account. Like, because movies and books are very intersectional. They intersect a lot. I would say just starting there, just listening to what people have to say, observing for yourself, like what you keep seeing over and over again, and bringing on a diverse team. But, you know, again, like we talked about earlier on, it goes so much more than skin deep. You know, a diversity of thought is also very important, a diversity of experiences. And I think you're good to go. But honestly, I'm different. I don't want to say I'm different. That's not fair to say. But like, I am maybe a little bit more understanding than a lot of other people on this. Like, a lot of people, this actually is a criticism, I guess. Like, some people say I'm a little bit too compromising.
Or...
Yeah, I'm a little forgiving. I am forgiving about some things, because I understand intention does matter, you know, when people do have a good intention. I tend to be a little bit more forgiving of it. It's not excusing the action, but I am understanding, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
get that. Yeah.
yeah. So if you follow those 3 steps,
Hopefully we can progress as as you
hopefully,
know
yeah.
a humanity in terms of observing different cultures and representation and minority groups, and hopefully some point in the future we'll
Mm.
have that sort of fair ground and fair understanding. I think hopefully that's the goal, I imagine. But yeah, that's all the questions I had for you, Min. Is there anything else you wanted to add onto this video? In general, is there anything else you wanted to add? I mean, I think you ended that quite nicely with, you know, the sort of key points. Is there anything you wanted to finish out with?
No, I don't know what else to say other than just like keep watching movies. Just have fun with it. It's all fun. It's all good fun. Just watching movies, talking with other people, and yeah, just keep moving forward, like you said. So, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. At long last, we finally meet like in a kind of in-person situation.
Yeah, a virtual room. Yeah, it's been great. Like I said, I've loved, you know, keeping up to date with your sort of account over the last year, and yeah, it's been great to virtually meet and have this discussion, and hopefully people that are watching on my channel hopefully can broaden their horizons and think about films a little bit differently and any other media sort of going forward. But I've loved having you on, Min. Thank you very much, and I'll put all your links down to your Instagram down below so people can go and follow your account.